That's just um, cool. So I'm unmuted. You all can hear me in the Zoom room? I hope. Yeah, see my little being highlighted, so I think. Okay, we can go ahead and get started. So bonjour, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Duade magazine to go, Forrest Indigenous cause, Nagajo Nangamu Jaba, Gash Chicago, Went to Kaganda, Nigig and Dodem. Hi, my name is Forrest. I'm Ojibwe. I'm originally from Minnesota, but lived here in Chicago for the past few years. I'm really excited to be here with you all. I'm going to be talking about a project on Indigenous water pedagogies and how we cultivate relations with water through the reading of water. You see that, it's me up here, but we have I have three other colleagues that weren't able to be here today. But I thought it was important to acknowledge them because I don't do this work on my own. In fact, many of you in this room are also a part of this work. And so I feel like it's important to acknowledge that. Okay, let's get started. So we wanted to open with just a little activity. I passed some Post-it notes around. If you didn't get a Post-it note, maybe there should be a person next to you who has one. Just take a few moments to think, what do you think is important for our young people to learn about water? And if you just want to write that on a Post-it note, and maybe if you want to like put it up on the table over there, and we can kind of just see what everyone said. And let me know if you didn't get a Post-it note. Or yeah. Okay. And those of you in the chat, maybe if you want to like put it in the chat. I'm seeing- Okay, cool. Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Yeah. And if you wrote something down, I think it would be cool to just like put it on the table and we can kind of see like collectively what we all think is important for our young people to learn about water. And take a moment to read other people's too. Mhm. Cool. Cool. Thank you for putting them in the chat, everyone. Cool. So just kind of as we go through this presentation, just kind of like hold some of those ideas with you, like what you think is important to learn about water, because we're going to return to them later on in the presentation. So this is the plan for the day. I'm going to start by setting up a little context about the project, and then we're going to think about water education as it exists in schools. And then I'm going to introduce Indigenous water pedagogies as sort of an alternative to the way that water is taught in schools. And specifically, I'm going to be looking at two components of Indigenous water pedagogies: relations with water and the reading of water. And I'm going to expand on that a little bit in the presentation. And then 4, we're going to actually be seeing Indigenous water pedagogies in action. So we're going to be looking at some data together and kind of noticing like what's happening in the data, how we're teaching about water. And then last, I'm going to share some learning materials from the ISTEAM website. And I'll talk a little bit more about ISTEAM in a bit here. So yeah, I thought it was important to start with how I really see this work. How I approach this work is I think it's grounded in the prophecy of the 7 fires. For those that don't know, the Anishinaabe people, we have a prophecy that right now we are in the time of the 7th fire. So in the time of the 7th fire, we would have 2 paths that we can choose to walk down. One path would be well worn, but it would be scorched. The other path would not be well worn. It would be a little harder to walk down, but it would be green. And so it would be our choice upon which path to embark. And that is summarized here by Winona LaDuke. So the way that I see these 2 paths are alternative models of what we call nature-culture relations, or ways that we relate to the natural world. So the scorched path is relations with the natural world that are rooted in extraction and consumption. And the green path that we should be walking down is our relations with the world that are rooted in reciprocity and sustainability and love, I think. And so of the relations with the world that we can focus on, water is among the most important, if not the most important. Water is the basis of all life. But even though it's the basis of all life, like so many of the world's problems today seem to relate to water and not healthy relations with water, whether it be pipelines, whether it be droughts, floods, water contamination, access to water, right? These are all some of the most pressing problems in the world that we as a human people, as human species, are facing right now. And so the point of this is that all these problems here, they're fundamentally issues of learning, right? They point to a need that we as human people need to learn how to be in better relations with water, with the natural world. And so that is a problem of education. And it points to the need for systems of education that cultivate healthy relations with the natural world and with water. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So that brings me to ISTEAM. For those that don't know, ISTEAM stands for Indigenous Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics. It's a multi-site community-based design research project and a summer program. So it's multi-site. We have a summer program that we run here in Chicago. In the past, we've run, there have been ISTEAM programs in Menominee. Currently, we're working with 2 other partner sites, the Little Traverse Band of Odawa Indians in Michigan, and then the Tulalip tribes in Washington. And so what makes ISTEAM special is that it's land and water based. So we spend pretty much the entire day outside in the woods, learning with our plant and our animal relatives. And land and water really informs the design of ISTEAM. To quote one of our community co-designers, land has to have a seat at the table. We're not just learning about land, we're learning with and from land. Another important part about ISTEAM is that we deliberately engage Indigenous families and communities. So we don't just like come up with this education program on our own and bring it to the community. We work with community and with families, and we get together and we kind of like dream up what kind of learning environments do we want for our young people, for our community. What do we want our young people to know so that, they're the future, so that our community can thrive. And so these 2 components really deliberately disrupt the history of education, of Western education, is that it's separated Native children from their families. It's taken them from their families, sometimes like literally just, kidnapped children from their families. And it also puts them in a building, isolated from land, like in a box for 8 hours a day for 5 days a week. And so through these 2 components, we're disrupting the separation of Native children from land and from their families. And so I'm going to be zooming in on a specific part of this program and focus on an arc of activity involving learning about the Chicago River. And that's from ISTEAM 2019. So we did this a few years ago. So I think most of the people here are probably familiar with Zhigaagwaa Zibi, or the Chicago River. But just kind of give some context on that. Like I said, river relations is a kind of water relations that we focus on in ISTEAM. There's a long history of pollution to the Chicago River, as I'm sure many of you know. And one unfortunate, hi. Well, one unfortunate side effect of this is that it kind of creates damaged narratives about the river. So the one thing that I think most people in Chicago know about the river, they don't know who lives there. They don't know what the river needs to thrive. They just know that the river's dirty, it's gross, it's toxic. They know about the pollution. And while there's certainly truth to that, like we haven't been taking care of the river. Having that kind of orientation to the river makes it hard to see the river as a relative, right? Like, how are you going to be in relation to something when the only thing that you know about it is that, oh, that's dirty, I would never go in that. And so recently there have been positive changes for the Chicago River. I think in 2015 there was a regulation, new regulations to the water quality in Chicago and in Illinois. There's been restoration efforts, there's been a dam removal. And so these things are ways that people are remembering to respect the Chicago River again. And these kinds of stories are really important to tell, because usually when we think about climate change, we think about, the day after tomorrow, like the world is going to end and we're all going to die. And that's not it's not very productive, right? We need stories about how we're adapting and how we're going to continue to be able to build a thriving future for future generations. So it's important to focus on the ways that humans are remembering to respect water again. And that's what we do in ISTEAM. It's okay. Yeah, so these are sort of like the high level learning objectives of the ISTEAM river activities. It was designed to support field-based observations. So we actually went to the river, like you can see here, pretty much all of the learning that happened about the Chicago River, like we were actually at the river, we were in the field. We looked for like indicator species and biodiversity. For those that might not know, like indicator species is kind of like a ecological science term that it's basically like a species. It could be like a plant or an animal, but it's like a relative that if that relative is present in the ecosystem, it's a signal for that the ecosystem is healthy. And so we don't really use the term like indicator species when we're talking with kids, but we do communicate that core idea is that, oh, look at like there's a frog here, like we're seeing a lot of frogs. That means that because frogs are sensitive to clean or dirty water, that means that the river is doing well. So that's one component. Another component that I have been talking about is we focus on ethical relations with the Chicago River. So we're not just learning about like biodiversity and like the ecology of the river. We're also talking about like what are our responsibilities to the river? What's our relationship to the river? So there's that ethical component as well. That's really important. And then lastly, we talk about the history, things like the dam, things like pollution, and also possible futures for the river. So we talk about how like we're in this important time of change right now, where the history before is there's been a lot of degradation and a lot of pollution to the river, but people are starting to remember to live in right relations with the water again. And so it's like kind of the special time where we can kind of see this change starting to happen. And so we try to like, in some of the activities, as you'll see, we really try to get young people to like hone in and kind of like witness that change. So these are kind of like specific like logistics about the river activities. We had two sort of, I guess you could call them like sub activities that made up the river activities. The first was before and after drawings up here. So students, we talked about the dam removal. And then we went to the river and we talked about how students are looking at the before part of a before and after picture. And we asked them to draw what they see right now, to draw a before picture, and then imagine how their drawing will look like in the future. So drawing is sort of like a way in to like looking at like really fine details, like do you see paw prints? Do you see tracks? Like what birds or animals are in the area? Like how does the riverbank look? And then, you know, the fact that it's a before picture, you know, there's an after as well. So again, like we're kind of trying to get the group to attune to like the change that's happening. Yeah, careful notice things and imagining possible features for the river. I touched on that. So that was the first activity. The second activity was we set fish traps. And setting fish traps is kind of a way to talk about who lives in the water. You know, there were at the beginning of camp, there were actually a lot of kids who were like, well, nothing lives there. Like, but over time, through fish traps and through just like going out in the water and looking for different water relatives, they're like, oh, wait, like there's bluegills, there's crayfish, like there's actually all these beings that are living in the water, right? And it's like you could see like a switch flip in their head where it's like, oh, like, wow, there's like life here. And so later on in the week, like we just had a lot of fun, like especially crayfish, like, you know, everywhere you looked, like if you learn to look, like you would see crayfish everywhere. And then just like, you know, it's a lot of fun just trying to catch crayfish. And we have a data clip about that I'll share with you all, so you can kind of see what that was like. So again, we're gonna take like another kind of reflective moment. You don't have to write anything down this time. You can just like close your eyes, kind of think back to when you were in school, or if you're a parent or, you know, someone in your family is still in school, you can think about them. But what and how did you learn about water in school? So just kind of go back and, you know, kind of bring yourself back to school. And I'm going to be asking some guiding questions. So did you actually get to touch and feel water? Was it water that was in a lake or a river, maybe an ocean? Or is it water that was like from a sink or in a pool? Did you talk about water in isolation or water in relation to other life, like plants and animals and humans? Was there any recognition of Indigenous peoples and their relations to water? And now think about how we opened up the activity with things that are important for young people to learn about water. Was any of that captured in the way that you learned about water in school? So you can go ahead and open your eyes. I am guessing that most of you thought to yourself, no. I saw some people shaking their heads. So yeah, water education as it's taught in schools, I'm sure you're familiar with this. You know, like I remember doing these like hydrologic cycle worksheets. We talk about like the molecular composition of water. This is a picture of the reversal of the Chicago River. If you're from Chicago, you might have learned about that in school. Me, I went to school in Minnesota, but kind of like a similar thing was like I learned about the construction of the Hoover Dam. And the way it's talked about is it's like this great feat of engineering, right? Like, oh, look at, like, we're so marvelous. We built this huge dam where we reversed the river. But there's no discussion about like, well, should we be building dams? Should we be reversing the river, and why? And none of these three actually involve like touching water, right? When water is actually being like touched and when students are like engaging with water, it's usually kind of like this. I don't know if you can really see that well, but in preschool education, it's like really common to have like water sensory tables. And it's like kind of like a space where, you know, kids can like pour water and kind of like feel water on their hands. And it's like water is like a sensory experience that is supposed to be good for development. But again, like for none of these, like there's no talk about what are our relations to water. There's no talk about like the political or ethical dimensions of like what it means to be with water. And furthermore, all of these take place almost exclusively indoors, right? So there's no actually learning about water out in the world. And so Indigenous water pedagogies, oh, slide got kind of messed up, but Indigenous water pedagogies is sort of an alternative to water as it's taught in school. So if you're like me, like a few years ago, I had to learn what pedagogies mean. It's like one of those $10 words, you know. So pedagogies, for those that don't know, is it's basically like your philosophy or your underlying approach to teaching and education. So, you know, if you think that water is an object, is something that is exclusively for humans to own and consume, then that's gonna affect, it's gonna shape how you teach about water, right? If you think that water is a relative, if water is something that's sacred, if it's something that is important for future generations, then that's gonna shape how you teach about water, right? So this is really, what we're really after here is teaching about water in a way that's grounded in our indigenous knowledges and our indigenous ways of being and our traditional teachings, et cetera. And so the two components that I'm going to be covering here that comprise indigenous water pedagogies are our relations to water and the reading of water. And I'm going to expand on those in later slides. The reason this Venn diagram is here is that I wanted to highlight that these aren't really separate, like they're two components, but there's like a lot of overlap. It's like one thing, like, you know, as you're reading water, I also think that you're making relations with water. So yeah, I just wanted to add that here. And in fact, like, you know, the Venn diagram was just something that was easy to put on PowerPoint. What I really had in my mind that I couldn't figure out how to do on PowerPoint was like having a river with like different tributaries going into the river, you know? And so relations to water is like one tributary, and then reading water is another, and they come together to form a one river, right? That's what water pedagogy. So maybe I'll ask David to help me out with getting that on. Yep. Might reach out to him. So yeah, the first component is relations with water. So when we think about science education, you know, a lot of times it's focused on like these techno-scientific like approaches and kind of like understandings, but we don't really ever talk about like we don't ever, science education is often missing like ethical questions, like should we questions, kind of going back to like the dam example, like we built this dam, like it's, you know, impressive, but you know, should we be building dams? And so yeah, this kind of like first component of water pedagogies really focuses on like ethics and our relations with water. And I think this quote by Robin Kimmerer just sums it up really beautifully. She writes that restoring land without relationship is an empty exercise. It is a relationship that will endure and relationship that will sustain the restored land. Therefore, reconnecting people in the landscape is as essential as reestablishing proper hydrology or cleaning up contaminants. It is medicine for the earth. And so again, like it doesn't, we could have all like the most fanciest tech and scientific understanding in the world, but if we don't have a relationship with water, then that's not going to get us anywhere. Like Wayne said in the earlier presentation, like if we don't have clean water, if we don't have clean air, then like what do we really have, right? We don't have anything. So the second component of Indigenous water pedagogies is reading water. So reading water, you know, it actually involves like learning with water. You have to go out in the world and see water as it exists in the natural world. You know, it's all about like making careful noticings and field-based observations. So I really love this picture because if you see like pretty much everyone, they all have their eye like on water, right? They're all engaging and making sense of like what's happening in the river. And it involves socio-ecological reasoning about water. You know, so like asking questions like, where does this water come from? Where is it going? Who lives in the water? What does this water need to thrive? Becoming fluent in questions like that is the skill of reading water. And then the last thing I want to say about this is that we're being deliberate about using the term reading water because this is really a form of literacy, right? Just like learning to read text or like read books, learning to read water or learning to read land opens up how you see the world, right? It like totally changes. When you walk by a river, like you recognize like the people that live in that water in the river. And it just really changes how you perceive the world and how you walk through the world. Okay, so now we're getting into the data clips. I'm going to be sharing some data with you all. This is from the before and after activity. So just as a reminder, this is where we asked the group to draw like the before part of the before and after picture. So, you know, we talked about the dam removal and then asked them to draw the before part of the before and after picture. And then, so the other thing is that this isn't in the data, but I just thought it would be important to mention that the facilitator here, she opens with a story. And it's just a story about her family and about how someone in her family fell into the river and how her and her family had to do ceremony with the river to kind of like thank them for not to thank the river for taking their child. So I'm not adding that story because it's not my story to tell or to share with you all. But I think it's important to mention that starting with story is like really important for Indigenous pedagogies and kind of like acknowledging like the water spirits and being in relation with that. So that's like kind of the grounding that this learning is taking place in. So I'm going to share this clip of data, and then I was thinking we could do some turn-in talks. And I put some grounding questions here just to kind of like have in the back of your mind as you're watching. So think, what relations with the river are being cultivated? And then how is the group reading the river?
But the other thing about that is for me, the dam removal is really exciting. And the changes in people deciding that this river deserves to be clean, both for us, but all of our relatives that live here, means that human people are learning to respect these rivers again too. Okay, so you guys get to witness this and you get to decide, are you going to honor that relationship with the river or not? And part of the way that we can do that is by looking really carefully and noticing what's happening. And every year, hopefully you will come back to our summer program. And in a few years, we could come back to this place and you'll be able to see what's different here. And I know you all were just noticing some things. So human people have a really important relationship with this river. What else? Why else? Who else benefits from having a clean river? Who else uses this river, do you think? Who else is the river important for? So other animals like deer, what other kinds of animals? Fish? What else do we think lives around here? Frogs? You guys see some frogs? Three frogs. That's a good sign. Did you know that frogs are really sensitive to clean or dirty water? It's a good sign that you saw some frogs in here.
So take a moment, turn to the person next to you and just kind of take like a minute or 30 seconds to talk about what you noticed in the clip.
Because within we could be like, yeah.
Okay, let's bring it back. Sorry to cut that off. I heard a lot of rich discussion. Does anyone have anything that they want to share broadly with the group? I heard a lot of really intense discussion.
So I grew up in Florida on the East Coast in a small town, and on the Indian Lagoon, which is the most diverse estuary in the US. And both my parents are marine biologists. And that's why I live there.
Nice.
so this really like brought out some deep memories from my childhood, going down the river with my mom and learning about the mangroves and when I was little, like my mom would like personify the mangroves and explaining their role in protecting and creating shadows and stuff. The algae from growing, there's lots of different creatures to live there. And that was so powerful in kind of changing my whole worldview of water being important not only to us, but to everyone.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of connections to what you shared, right? And like actually being in the mangrove, yeah. And yeah, that's beautiful. And the fact that it was like with your family, right? Like you didn't have that kind of like water education like in school, like it was with your relations with your relatives, right? Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So these are just the things that like, I'm sure that you probably raised a lot of similar things in your own conversations. But you know, there's a focus on remembering to respect water and like the decisions that we make impact the health of the river. And then I really loved how the facilitator, she opened up like river isn't just important for humans, but it's important for all of the more than human relations that live in the river as well, like frogs and deer and fish. Yeah, and then for reading water, like presencing animals that live in the area, even if they're not like visible right now, just knowing that they're there. And then, you know, being able to see signs like maybe there was a deer walking through here at some point, even if we don't see one right now. And then, yeah, frogs is an indicator of a healthy river. That's kind of like indicator species, which I was talking about earlier. Cool. So that was one piece of data. This is a continuation of the same activity, just a little bit later on. And I wanted to show this because it raises some other pretty cool moments.
Yeah. So something to keep in mind also is that the dam was recent. And so right now we're in a stage of transition. And what I said before was that we have sort of a before and after situation. Right now we're in the before. Very soon I suspect it's going to change. And then we're going to have a different final after that we can also see in the future. So when you're thinking about this and drawing the pictures, think about it how this is going to be right now. Maybe envision what's different. Something to think about, like for example, if you remove a dam, what do you think is going to happen to the water? The same amount of water going through, but what changes? Any ideas what might change?
I will go faster.
She said it may go faster. It may be faster because if there's a step here and I have to walk down the step, that slows me down a bit. But if I can go right through, I got the same speed, I can maintain the same amount of speed. It may be faster. The banks is not necessarily stable. It can get wider or it can get shorter. So this is where we're going to be right now. Right now, this is what we want to draw. We want to make a bunch of observations. If you see paw prints, put it in your drawing. If you see birds or whatever you see, whatever sticks out for you, make it in your drawings. Put it in your drawings.
And part of the reason, the more detail, because right now you might not know all the little things that are going to change. So you want to try to pay attention to all these things, because right now it might be hard for us to say, well, what will change? If the fish people come back to this river, what changes? Okay, if the dam is removed and the fish people come back, and a lot of fish people are back in this river, there may be lots and lots of things that change, and we might see a healthier river. But you have to pay attention really carefully. Like, you know what one I keep noticing that I'm really curious about? Can we notice that there's lots of old, dead, but pretty big trees around the edges? And I kind of wonder if that's going to change. Or I see a lot of mud, and sometimes that's just because the river height is different, but I wonder if the plant life around the edges of the river will change. So right now I'm noticing there's lots of mud. Okay, so what if I'm going to take about 5 or 10 minutes, find your own spot for a second, and we want to have you draw your observations as detailed as possible, so that next year and the year after and the year after, when we come back, you're able to see the change.
Does anyone want to share what they noticed?
The language she uses, fish people,
Yes.
other than human people.
Yep, exactly. Let's go on.
And I think when you talk about public school, for a teacher to speak like that, for your own skin,
Yeah,
because it's not acceptable, but it's a different perspective on things that when you're in school or in school at all.
yeah, yep, 100%. Mm-hmm.
So that language, you have to be very, I don't want to say careful, but you need to explain, I'm not native. So you need to explain where it's coming from when you talk like that.
Yep.
But I found, I spoke this for 42 years, but I found that if you explain where it was coming from, the kids accepted it.
Yep. Yeah, schooling's not always a safe place to be doing this kind of education, right? I saw one other hand. I think below it, yeah.
Yeah, Isabella and I talked about this in the earlier clip too, but it's that facilitator keeps on mentioning the students coming to the river in the future.
Yeah.
Saying you might come back for another program, you might
Yep.
come back in a few years,
Yep.
and then in this last clip too, like that's kind of like there's a emphasis on this ongoing relationship with
Yep.
water, specifically with that place.
Yep. You guys should be doing my job, because that's pretty much exactly what I said. Look at that. Talk about fish people, and then what you were talking about, river, Lois, like returning to the river again and again, like deepening that relation with the river. And then I think the other thing is like river, the river is healing, and like unsettling those like narratives about like the river being like damaged and disgusting. Like the river is kind of on a path to recovery and something that we can be in relation with. And then in terms of like reading water, like drawing observations and like paying close attention to what's in the river ecosystem, and then thinking about both the history and the future of the river. So we're gonna move on to one third and final clip. And so this is a different activity. So this is involving the fish traps that I mentioned earlier. And so the group here is they're walking upstream to check on a fish trap, and someone spots a particularly big crayfish. And then they all work together to catch him. And you're gonna see like some group cooperation and like sort of reading of the crayfish's movements, among other things. You catch and release, yeah, catch and release. We take them home and we eat them, and that's another part though, we that I didn't mention is we talk about these as like subsistence practices. So like the educator in this clip, he doesn't say it in this clip, but like in other parts of the program, he talks about like, well, fish traps is, how our people used to eat. We used to like set this out like early in the morning and we'd come back in the evening and that would be dinner. So, yeah.
Oh, see him? See his antenna?
Oh, I think it's a she. It's gotta be.
I can see it.
Big one.
Oh, really?
There's a little baby one right there,
Yeah.
sitting outside. Oh yeah.
Oh, it got.
Oh,
There we go.
Fatty.
so big. And there's another one right
No.
there. Right there, another one.
He's under the rock.
Wait, wait for that.
So it's a male who got into a fight with another male, and they ripped his claws off.
Oh.
The big one?
Yeah.
Alright,
So that's a-
just grab it there?
Yeah. Grab it.
Wait, his quads are gone?
Yeah. So when they get into fights, they snip each other's pincers off.
Did they grow back?
I'm
Yeah.
gonna trust you. I don't think so.
Yeah, I saw him because he would have been.
They're tough, but they won't hurt. They're too big.
But we can't go
You wanna try and catch it?
Oh,
Okay.
get ready.
Yeah, but we don't step on crayfish.
If you guys are wondering,
Because the herons.
Okay, it's going towards that way.
wanna crush it.
Cool.
I wanna crush it.
Are you gonna grab it? Pick it up?
Yeah, ready? 3, 2, 1.
Watch your toes.
Yeah, it's gonna stay still, I assume.
Just let the water run until it clears up.
Yeah, I see him.
I wish he would have let us
Hold
know.
on.
Y'all, if you're gonna head back up, that's fine. Just let us know, okay?
Yeah,
before
put
you
your
go,
hands over
just
there.
so we
Put
know.
your hands over there.
Does he
Try
have
to
to
like
walk?
put them on.
Yeah.
Don't shake me. I need light. I need light. I need light. Oh, there he is.
Where is he?
Right there.
Oh, you poked him in the bag or anything in there?
Just the bait.
Nice.
The bluegill.
Oh, he really doesn't.
All right, guys. Remember I was talking about the. Remember the hybrids? So the ones here. So we have a blue rusty combo, but all of his.
Can I see? I want to see his claws.
Oh, you're holding. How do you
So, yeah, because the males get into fights. See, so maybe a week ago got into a fight. That means they're actually getting territorial, so that they're going to start laying eggs. So these little babies are.
What happened?
But do you think if he has the pincers, he's gonna die without the pincers?
Yeah, maybe.
He could still eat because you see these little legs in the front? That's actually what they use to eat. All those big pincers are for is defense and for fighting.
What'd you all notice? Mm-hmm. Yep.
Cooperation.
Yep. Cooperation and divided attention. Mhm.
Willingness, like freeness and willingness to like be standing in the river,
Yeah.
feet wet, digging around.
Yep. Yep.
Really, a lot of curiosity.
Yep.
I want to see him.
Yep.
Where is he?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like a lot of like learning can be fun, right? I think like in schools, like we often think that like learning has to be like this drudgery kind of thing where we just have to get students through it. But like if you work on creating the right environment, like students want to learn and learning can be fun and enjoyable. So yeah, again, like a lot of the same things. There's like the use of the he pronouns, like it kind of started off with like, oh, like what's it doing? And then like over time, they kind of started to use he. There was a moment where I don't know if you caught it in subtitles, but like one of the students was like, oh, I don't want to step on crayfish. Like I want to be careful about where I'm walking. And the collective deliberation and like the cooperation is something that I also think is really important because I think that this is kind of like an idea that I'm still sort of like baking in my mind. It's like kind of a half-baked idea, but like I think there's something about like being with the river, kind of like being with the canoe, where when you're with the river together and you're kind of like working on your relationship with the river, like the river pays that back and is like helping and facilitating relationships with one another, right? So we're not just doing as we're making relationships with the river or with the canoe or with whatever kind of work we're doing, we're also building relationships with one another. And in terms of reading water, yeah, there's a lot of talk about like, oh, where's the crayfish going to go? Like lifting up the rocks, letting the muddy water clear up. And then, there's talk about like the crayfish's gender and, oh, it got in a fight, it's going to be able to eat, etc. Yeah. So that's the last clip. Last thing is I just wanted to like share some materials that we have on our website. So you can like go to indigenousssteam.org, or if you just Googled Indigenous STEAM, we have a website full of family learning materials. We designed them in 2020, when everyone was like on severe lockdown, and because we weren't able to have summer camp, but we wanted to kind of make a way for us to like stay in community and keep doing this work together. So we have like a handful of materials. This is like a screenshot of one. There's materials that involve learning about water, about plants, about birds, and there'll be more to come. So yeah, if you just like go to our website and look up family learning materials, you can kind of see there and learn more about the work that we do, and hopefully do this with your family or with your community. That's all I have. anyone has any questions, if anyone has any answers, yeah, I take those too.
I wanted to share something. My husband and I kayaked the Chicago River last summer. We put it in the North Fork and went all the way down to Navy Pier. And it was really interesting because there were parts of it that were pretty, I don't know, smelled chemically and heavy chemicals. But there were parts of it that were really beautiful. We saw blue herons, and the urban ecology people have been doing these floating sort of net thing with indigenous river plants. And it really is hopeful, you know, and I really appreciated that about your presentation, because if we just say, well, that's really dirty and, you know, that's not a solution. So, good on you.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. So that you mentioned kayaking. That's actually something that we're talking about for this upcoming iteration of ISTEAM. Is we'd really love to do like a canoe journey or some kind of like activity where we're actually traveling the waterway, like our ancestors used to do, right? Like we've always used to do. And you know, that's like the connection to that canoe. Like we want to kind of like bring that back. And so yeah, I think it's beautiful that you did that, and hopefully we can do something similar.
I wouldn't recommend the loop area. It's pretty
Yeah,
dangerous.
yeah.
Definitely lose a kid too.
Yeah. There's some safety precautions and for sure, yeah.
Yeah, they're STEAM, right?
Mhm.
And it stands for?
Science, technology, engineering, arts, and math.
Okay, and Indigenous.
Yep, it's all indigenous.
And we're looking at water.
Mhm.
And we looked at a lot of educational, sort of how do we teach our young. Have you ever, seen, you're talking about technology. As an Indigenous person and already, I'm sitting here thinking and living in an urban area, especially in metropolitan Chicago. Our water's slowly, and we so disrespected it. What are we gonna do about it as Indigenous people, in the way we are so connected and this day, to me, there should be a bigger picture as far as, especially, we're talking about, I'm science-based myself, network engineer. There's a dilemma in internally for me as an Indigenous person, and being so strongly science, which is counterproductive and it's destructive to our world, nature, the earth, which today we're celebrating. What can we do, science-based, to try to help this? I live in south suburbs of Chicago. I live down in Ransom. Every single time I come to the city, I cross over the Des Plaines River right next to the sewage treatment, and it reeks. And the thought that the thousands, millions of people who their waste goes down the river that runs next to the Des Plaines River, ultimately around Joliet, empties into it, and ultimately into the Illinois River. Just going camping, because I love camping, going down to Star Rock and being right there on one of the most beautiful places in the world. And then going out onto the river on a little ferry boat, it reeked. And I had to sit there and think about, that's the sewage dump of Chicago, our metropolitan city, going straight into the river that feeds right down the center of our state. What are we going to do about it? We have some kind of science and technology. We as an Indigenous people, putting our feet down. Another thing that bothers me is the disrespect and dyeing our river green for a holiday. I hate that holiday because of what we do
to the river. As a native person, it turns my stomach.
Mhm.
But you see, I don't know, it's the colonization. I don't know, what can I do?
Well,
I'm so few of me and so.
I hear you. I mean, I think in terms of like what we can do, and like one thing I hear you asking is like, what role does science play in like repairing that relationship? And I think one thing that gets overlooked a lot is that, like the things that we're doing, like a lot of people might look at like some of those data clips and like not really see it as science, but like fish trapping, being out in the water and like learning to like read water and like just reason about what relatives are in the area, that's science. Making canoes, that's science. And so these kinds of, going back to our traditions and like doing that, I think is, that's science,
I
and
have a
that
brother
plays a
who-
role in
I
building
have a
out the
brother who
future.
spearfishes every week.
Mhm.
And he, or
That's
every-
science.
every year, and he teaches it to the young, and he goes out and he deliberately spearfishes in all of the lakes in the city territory in
Mhm.
Wisconsin, because if you don't, as a native, you will lose that right.
Mhm.
And he teaches it to the young, to teach them to keep doing it,
Mhm.
or we will lose it. If you don't use it, you lose it. And yet, he has to always check with Woodward to see what fish he can eat and what he can't. And he can catch the most beautiful musky or huge walleye, and he'll throw it back because it's lived too long, and the toxins that are built up in the fats of that fish now make it dangerous to eat.
Mhm.
And that's in some of the cleanest parts of our
Yeah.
country. What are we gonna do about it as Native people?
Yeah.
That's where we need the science.
You had a clip from, or an excerpt from Braiding Sweetgrass, Ron Kimmer. She and Megan and I are on the board of a group called Indigenous Arts and Sciences in northern Wisconsin.
Mhm.
And it's an educational group that's trying to indigenize the curriculum, the STEM curriculum in schools that serve a disproportionate number of Native children. And so during the summer, it brings in science teachers from public schools, and the vast majority are non-Native. But they learn how to sort of indigenize their science curriculum and think about things like being in relationship with other than human people, and try to change the mindset and incorporate an Indigenous perspective into their science curriculum.
We have to, because we are outnumbered. So we have to, it's an Indigenous way of looking at things. It's something we have to not just instill in our young, but we have to instill it in all people. Indigenous or not.
Allyship is really important.
Yeah.
But I mean, you said, what can we
It takes all
do?
of us.
This is the kind of thing that maybe, it's already being done. They're not alone. There are other groups like that
We
are
need to-
doing this.
we have to find out, just the numbers, we're gonna have waste. We have to figure out what we're gonna do with it, other than dumping it in our water. We
Water
need-
treatment plants.
We
Just
need
about every
scientists.
municipality has them.
We need new ideas and scientists and a better way of doing things.
Yeah. I see there's something in chat, I think. This is from Adriana Sandrolini. Thank you for this presentation. I'm just going to read it out loud because so you all can hear too. It made me think about this relationship I had with water as a child in Mexico compared to the one I have in the US. In Mexico, we lived with the water as the river going through the town sustained the life of the town. It was clean and healthy. In Chicago, we've used the water as a thing / a tool for survival and feel powerless to make a positive impact. Yeah. I don't have any easy answers to that. I don't think there is an easy answer to that. I think it's just something that we all have to do and kind of like find what's our little piece that we can like do and to try to push things forward and to try to
I
make a
think
better future.
we have to have, we have a goal, and we have young people, and what we need to teach them is we have to have them, maybe our science and technology, we have to go in a different direction and come up with an improvement, a different way of using our waste and it being a natural resource in some way to keep it from drowning in it. We need to have a way of using it. Science-based inventions. We need scientists.
Mhm.
We need people to come up with some new ideas in order to clean up our world.
Sandra, I think we also need more civic engagement. You know, for a long time, I know my reservation had a really poor record of voting. And the environmental problems have gotten so huge in northern Wisconsin that our people are finally starting to run for office, get elected to office. They're saying no to big extraction industries. You know, so some of it is just getting involved in the civic process and you know, injecting yourself into local politics.
Yeah.
Run for the local zoning board, you know, serve on the Metropolitan Water Board. You know,
My
I mean,
family's been good at that. My reservation serves.
Oh,
Yeah,
you're both Bad River?
someplace,
Cool.
yeah. And my family is big in, or has been in politics.
Yeah.
My mother's is an ex-tribal chair.
Mm.
My actual cousin is tribal chair.
Cool.
And, well, you know what Joe does, so he brings the issues up for everybody to see.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
but just to kind of amplify that, 10 years ago, we had no representation on the Ashland County Board. It was, even though we represent 35% of the population of Ashland County, we had no representation. Then 3 people ran for the board and got elected, and the entire Ashland County Board voted against a 22-mile long open pit taconite mine. You know, I mean,
That's why I'm so proud of really of coming from that area, because they're doing leaps and bounds and very proud of it.
I feel like we're hijacking your session.
No, it's okay. This is the purpose of the Q&A. I mean, I think we're about at time though, so I just wanted to close with I mentioned this in the previous presentation, but we're hoping to do a community co-design and canoe day at Northwestern, so you can put that day on your calendar, Sunday, May 22nd. And yeah, we just want to honor the canoe that was built and gifted to us, and also deepening our relationship with our waterways in Chicago as the means of travel that our ancestors have always traveled in this place. So we're going to do some co-designing for ISTEAM. So if you want to like have a say in like, you know, what ISTEAM will look like for this upcoming summer, come over. And then potentially, again, like depending on weather and wind conditions, because Lake Michigan can be pretty risky, we might be canoeing on the lake and potentially making etchings for the birch bark canoe. So thank you, everyone. You go ahead.
Who's doing the 70th birthday bash?
Before everyone leaves.
That day?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Your
well,
program.
there will be other opportunities.
If you don't mind filling it out, just a survey about the back, and then show me the completed survey thing on your phone. I'll give you a wrap.
My actual birthday is May 15th, but there's a big field opening this that weekend, so.
May is busy. There's
Yeah,
like, we
May is
really
really
struggle
busy.
finding a good date for this.
Okay, so where's this?
Thank you for joining, everyone. How was that?